Hello BookTube! Late last year, Kieran of Katie Books created a triptych of videos in which he listed 10 classics he thought his audience should read. He started with books published between the invention of writing and the very last second of 1899. The second video featured books published between the first second of 1900 and the very last second of 1999. And these were modern classics. And the final video listed 10 books published after the first second of 2000. These were the contemporary classics. A number of other booktubers, myself included, weighed in with our own lists and some commentary on Katie's lists. One of them was Steve Donahue. So when I did my 3 lists, I had an issue with the final one. I really couldn't come up with 10 contemporary works I thought would be classics that you should read. But Steve Donahue's list gave me an idea. Because of Steve's 10, I've experienced with 4 of them. And that gave me an idea. So the 4 books on Steve's list that I've had encountered, that I know of, are Perdido Street Station by China Mieville. I have read it and loved it, and I would second its inclusion in a list of 10 contemporary classics you must read. But Perdido Street Station, really, except for the fact that I really need to reread it at some point soon, because it's been about over 10 years, I think, since the last time I read it. Doesn't really bear much for the rest of this video, so yeah. Goodbye, Perdido Street Station. But the other 3 books that Steve had on his list that I've had encounters with have all been bails. And those 3 were, if you can see the cover, okay, here we go. White Teeth by Zadie Smith. This is not going quite how I'd hoped. Okay, can you see it? So, White Teeth by Zadie Smith. The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon. And Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellman. So again, these 3 books I have read and have previously bailed on. And that gave me the idea to create a list of 10 contemporary classics candidates that I have previously bailed on. And so was born the 10 contemporary classics I must bail redeem. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I tend to bail on books quite heavily. But sometimes that bail is not quite the last word. That the book will eat at me. That I'll want to eventually take a second look at it. And those second looks, and sometimes more looks after a second bail, are what I call bail redemptions. And sometimes they're achieved. I successfully read a book that I have bailed on previously, and sometimes it might take a few times before either I finally achieve a bail redemption or I just give up. And so I thought, okay, what other 7 books could fit on a list? So I decided on some that I have wanted to, that have been eating at me, and some that maybe not so much, but I would just include them anyway. So those books are, so the other 7 are Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood, Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer. A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James. And The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton, and those are the ones that I have in my possession. The other two books I selected were The Overstory by Richard Powers. Oh, this is not going how I had hoped. Oh, well. Okay, so. And Lincoln and the Bardo by George Saunders. Must be something said for washed out covers that make it easily seeable in a washed out screen. But anyway, so those were the 10. Obviously, I have 7 of those books. White Teeth, The Overstory, and Lincoln and the Bardo I have not picked up yet. And given that I'm doing this video at the tail end of April and not in October, means that I will not be getting to those 3 books. I will not be picking them up because my 10 contemporary classics, So let me back up. So the 10 contemporary classics that I must bail redeem has been a failure, a miserable failure. There hasn't been a bail redemption amongst any of them. And that's rather frustrating. And so I thought I'm going to just make a video announcing the end of the 10 Contemporary Classics I Must Bail Redeem project and talk a bit about what happened and maybe why I came up with the project and some things at the end, depending how much time this takes up. So my idea was to read 1 book a month. And so I would finish up in October, which was probably going to be a bit of a problem anyway, because I was hoping to devote October to reading the shortlist for the Kundal History Prize, but that'll come later in the year. But anyway, so I started with the book that I had hoped would be the easiest bail redemption, and that was The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon. So to recap, this is a novel set in the 1940s, late 30s, early 40s, and into the 50s, about 2 cousins, Clay and Cavalier, who get into the early comic book industry. They create a superhero called the Escapist that becomes quite popular. Eventually, Cavalier joins the army during World War II and goes missing for a number of years. Meanwhile, Clay, who is a closeted gay man, marries Cavalier's ex-girlfriend, who is pregnant with Cavalier's son. After a very traumatic encounter with the police when they raided a dinner party. And so I first read this book in, I want to say, late 2001, early 2002. I would have been about 16, 17 at the time. No, would have been 17 or 18 at the time. But I remember I was still in high school when I had first bailed on this book. And there was a particular moment in the book that threw me out of it, that caused me to bail. And I remember liking the book up until that point. But now I'm thinking, given this most recent bail, because this was a bail redemption rejection, that I'm not entirely sure. Because instead of pushing past that bail point, I bailed much earlier. I wanted to bail during the chapter that described Cavalier's escape from occupied Prague. and the prose just did not work for me at all. And I don't know if I'm remembering what I had read of the book more fondly, or if I didn't really get on with it at the time, but it was just that moment. Just said, okay, this gives me a wonderful excuse to bow out. I don't know. I have tried other works by Michael Chapin, and I haven't had as much success with them either, so I don't know. But I'm wondering if perhaps, like during, because this have been during the period where I was a lot more interested in classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama, sort of like a co-regency period with science fiction and fantasy. So maybe I was a lot more tolerant with things that I'm not as much, that really does not work with me now or not. I don't know, but this ended up being about rejection and was pretty much a sign of what was to come. So then I moved on for February, since it was also February fantasy stories, that I would go ahead and read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. So I first read this. So this is a historical fantasy about an alternate England and magicians. And I'd wanted to read this book for a very long time. It is one of the major fantasy novels of the 21st century. I read the first sentences and absolutely hated what I read. Absolutely hated it. But I still thought, since this is such a major work, that even though I don't quite see it, that I should give it another go. And so I did, and I picked up this copy, I think in 2019, and hadn't touched it until this past February. And again, I utterly loathe this book. What I've read of it, I did get a little bit further this time than last time, but there will be no third attempt at this book. No. So for March, I had hoped to do just focus on March of the Mammoth. So since this is a Mammoth book, would be appropriate. So Duck's Newburyport. So I had to go. So this is a novel about a woman baking pies and going on a stream of consciousness rant. And I first read this book in early 2020. It was in the office, the waiting room of a podiatrist. And it didn't do anything for me. But it kind of ate at me, I think in part because there has been some significant praise for this novel on BookTube. Obviously, it made Steve's list of 10 contemporary classics you must read. So that kind of gave me a desire to have another go at this book. And on this reread, I did get a little bit further in, and yeah, there's some rhythm to the 1,000 pages of a run-on sentence. And yeah, it's kind of at points prose poetry, and it can maybe suck you in if you gel with it, but it's also monumentally boring. And if you do kind of get out of it, you don't want to go back. So, yeah. So, for March, I decided to go a little bit smaller. And so I tried Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer. So I first had to go at this book in the airport of I can never recall San Francisco's airport's name, but I was in the airport when I tried it, and it did nothing for me. This is a novel about Jonathan Safran Foer going to Ukraine to research a woman who helped one of his grandparents escape the Holocaust. And during his trip, he meets a Ukrainian family who are filled complete with characters, including one who becomes a friend of his. And there are some historical fiction bits here and there. I really did not like it at the time, and it had kind of been gnawing at me. I don't know why, but I decided, okay, I could throw this in for this project, and so I had another go at it, and this is just pretentious poo. Just, yeah, no. So then this past week, so by this point, I'm 4 books in, and I'm like, this isn't working. Whatever I had hoped, which I was hoping would be Bill Redemptions, and I would be happy and would be awesome, and maybe I wouldn't be as down on classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama as I currently am. So I'm like, okay, I have 3 left. Should I just continue trying them, or should I just do, okay, I'm going to try one and then maybe try a chapter or dip into the other 2 and see, okay, if there's anything I want to continue with, or if not, just go ahead in the project now. So on Tuesday, I had to go at The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. So I first had to go at this. So this is basically okay. So this is a novel about an old woman who wrote an autobiographical novel that she claimed had been written by her deceased sister, that details her affair with a pulp writer with communist sympathies. And eventually, after decades of trauma imposed on her by her abusive husband and sister-in-law, she had hoped that eventually the truth would be found by her granddaughter or something like that. I first had to go at this book in late 2002 or sometime in 2003, and I don't really remember much except for I didn't care for it. And I thought it was boring. And so I'd been wanting to have another go at Atwood. I have a unsatisfactory reading relationship with her. There's only really one book of hers that I've ever actually liked, The Robber Bride. And everything else, I don't. I mean, I have tried Cat's Eye 4 times. I mean, it's ridiculous how many times I've tried Cat's Eye, and I bounce off each time. So, anyways, I decided, okay, I probably should give Atwood a shot because likely at least some of her works, at least for some people, will be future classics if they're not already. But I really did not get on with this book. The story within a story, no. Just, yeah. I think in part it's because Margaret Atwood really is not a very good science fiction writer. But anyway, and that's because part of the novel within the novel is that the male lover in the novel, is writing a science fiction story, and it's fairly bad. But anyway, so then I decided, okay, I'm going to dip into A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James. So I first had to go at this book I think maybe a few months to a year or so after it won the Booker. And it's a historical novel set in Jamaica that sort of centers around the attempted assassination of Bob Marley. And I really did not get on with it when I read it, and my dipping into it, yeah, I'm not interested in continuing on with it. And the Luminaries is very similar. I had a go at it. I think I actually had a spell redemption attempt at it too. Like maybe a few months to a year or so after it won the Booker. And then I tried it again, I'm pretty sure. And both times it did nothing for me. It's kind of like, I mean, it's more real. Well, it's more of a detective mystery. In a way, it's about, it's a historical novel set in 19th century New Zealand, primarily the goldfields. And it's about a mystery. And at least in the synopsis, the mystery sounds interesting, but I don't know necessarily if, yeah, that really helps the mystery. But the prose, it's like Victorian pastiche, and it didn't do anything for me. And I'd hoped, because this book, as well as A Brief History of Seven Killings, have been, in a way, plaguing me for years, that I had wanted to give them another go, but I don't know why. So I dipped back into this one, and no. So that ends my 10 Contemporary Classics I Must Bell Redeem project. And so all that's left is to really sort of figure out what drew me to wanting to do this project. And I think part of it, I think, is that I'm at heart a mood reader who has a thing for trying to create reading projects with the intent of trying to make myself love classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama far more than I do, which is not much. It's basically the same thing with my America 20 project. That was an attempt to try to get me to love literary fiction, because for whatever reason I feel like I have to, or I should like and enjoy and devote a significant chunk of my reading time to classics and literary fiction, and it doesn't work. It never works. And instead it's basically masses of bales. So I really need to kind of resist that. As much fun as I have in actually creating the reading projects, but it's one thing if they actually worked, if they actually worked out, if I successfully read and enjoyed those books, and but they don't. The 12 TBR failed miserably. There was only like 2 books I actually managed to finish. One I liked, although I really hated the ending, and the other I really didn't like at all. And then the rest were all bales. My Reading America from last year really didn't work. My back to school project didn't work, except for hurricane season, which I liked, although I don't know necessarily if I like it enough to really want to reread it again. So yeah, and I think in a way like the failure of this project, I think, is coloring sort of my last video, my favorites as of April 18th, is very much colored by that. It's that fiction isn't quite doing it for me right now. I mean, and I've struggled with enjoying fiction for the last few years, and a lot of rereads haven't quite worked out. And I'm kind of now questioning, particularly that co-regency period where I was more amenable to classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama. Anyway, so I don't know. That was that. So anyway, so that's all I have for right now. I will be back tomorrow with weekly reads. I don't know if Eleanor, Catton, Marlon, James, and Margaret Atwood will make cameos tomorrow, or I'll just go ahead and refer you back to this video for them. Although I won't talk about them that much, except to just say, yeah, I bailed on, or I dipped in and just decided to cancel the 10 Contemporary Classics I Must Bail Redeem, because tomorrow's video is going to, weekly reads is going to be a bit, yeah, there's something else I want to have a long conversation about, so which will lead up into that. So far, the only thing that I've read that I've really been happy with was The Restless Kings by Nick Barrett, which I will gush about tomorrow first thing when I do weekly reads. But anyway, BookTube, that's all I got for today. So until I see you tomorrow, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.